It was funny. A couple of days ago, I had a comment on another video. It wasn't a video of mine. It was an interview with writer and journalist Gabrielle Glazer, who wrote it was a book about women in recovery. It challenged the 12-step paradigm about recovery in general and alcohol use disorders. And ultimately, I don't remember the entire interview, but I remember the context of what she was saying, that AA does harm to people. And some moron commented on the thing, and the first thing, of course, they had to say is, AA's been around for 80 years, and it's survived every single criticism that comes out against it. And we don't even bat an eye when bitter, resentful people like this bash our program. And same usual bullshit. Well, of course, it has not. It's survived every attack against it for the last 80 years because for a long, long time it's been accepted as the go-to for addiction. It's been given a whole lot of friendly PR service by pop culture entertainment, by the court systems, and by... There was a certain senator in the 70s, I believe it or not, that kicked open the doorway for what created this marriage between treatment centers and 12-step crap and addiction recovery as we know it today. In fact, it's the one that set the whole thing in motion. People wouldn't be being court-ordered into 12-step treatment had it not been for that one particular crooked politician. I'll have to look him up on another time and do a video on that, because I'm going to get off the topic of what I wanted to talk about here. But I had responded that we were in the 21st century, that surely we could do something better for the field of addiction than abandon yourself to God and surrender your will and lives over to the care of some cult religion group and some other things like that. But the other day I got this comment from this individual, which ironically enough I could have turned it around on him, but he was saying, Medow thinks that you protest too much, and then he went on and on with the usual standard definitions they have of AA. It didn't work for you. You have a resentment. You're just bitter and angry because you couldn't get sober in AA, and on and on and on it goes. Isn't it funny that whenever somebody criticizes the program, the first words is, well, because it didn't work for you, you want to bash it. Not because... They never say something like, well, why do you think it didn't work for you? In other words, they're not interested in really finding out if their cult is 100% foolproof or not, because they can't tolerate any criticism of it whatsoever. They just go into freak-out mode and meltdown mode when you bring up any criticism of it. And, of course, I batted back and forth with him for a couple of minutes, and, of course... nothing of substance ever comes out of doing that. It's a waste of time, and it just irritated me that he was saying that I was a religious zealot, that I was bitter and angry because I never could get sober, that I was probably drinking now. That the drinking thing is the only thing they've got. That's the only weapon that they've got in their arsenal for people who criticize their thing. The only thing they can hope for and dream for is that people like me end up in the gutter drinking ourselves to death so they can point their fingers and wag their fingers around and say, I told you so. That's what happens when you criticize our sacred religion. But it got me to thinking about something, because he had to use that on me twice. Medow thinks you protest too much. It didn't occur to me to just flip the script and say, well, I think that's what you're doing. You're having a meltdown because somebody talked bad about your cult. But he was trolling every comment on the video, and he was going on about AA saved millions, and, just not even worth really pondering about. But the me thinks you protest too much actually got me to thinking about something that used to bother me in AA meetings, because it's the only time in life that I was ever bashed or disliked or despised, because I read a lot. And I'm not one of these people... I'm not one of these people that goes around trying to sound like I'm way more intelligent, than I am. I mean, I'm sure you know the type I'm talking about, the intellectual types that like to use all these real big words, and they like to use all these complicated terms and all these complicated sentences to sound like they're a whole lot smarter than they really are. And sometimes when they're throwing that stuff out, you can tell this person is, I heard it saying once, if you can't dazzle them with your brilliance, then you just baffle them with bullshit. And that's what I'm talking about with these types. that pretend to be well-read, that pretend to be really, really educated, and they're really not that bright to begin with. I'm not one of these people that goes around throwing out literary references. I'm not one of these people that, you know, the first one in a conversation to say, well, that's just like that book I was reading, or, you know, there was another book I was reading. I'm not one of those kinds of people. It's just that generally in a conversational setting with me, I might casually throw out, well, it's kind of like this character in that book once said, or I might say, kind of like in that movie where he says this, or kind of like what he was talking about in that one book, or, you know, like, just like that. I mean, it's not like I try to take over a conversation and command it with some high horse intellectual superiority by claiming I'm some kind of heavyweight because I've always read a lot of books. But in AA, if I was to say something innocuous, like, you know, well, it's kind of like that character in that book, or kind of like what Camus was talking about one time, or something like that, they would always do the same kind of reaction. There you go, using all those big words to think you're so much smarter than everybody else. There you go, trying to sound like you're better than everybody else. You know, it's not my fucking fault if me saying I read a freaking book somewhere bothers you. I mean, it didn't occur to me to think that back then. But I remember one sponsor I had said he wished he could take all the books I ever owned or had at the time. I had quite a few, and he said, I just burned them all in front of you. And maybe then you'd learn to be humble, you know. Or he said, I'd just like to burn all your movies where you couldn't read nothing. I'd take away your ability to even own a book, except a big book, you know. Funny for these open-minded, tolerant people how that kind of works. But there were certain literary things I would hear in AA meetings, and it would bother me because it was taken completely out of context. One thing, for example, I'm going to get to Thy Known Self Be True, which comes from the same play as I Think You Protest Too Much. It comes from Hamlet. But I remember an old-timer, he used to sit in meetings, and he would say, now, in addition to reading the big book, I also like to read that really, really, really big book, the other big book. What he's talking about is the Bible. But he would say, you know, I'm just like Job. I'm denied 3 times before God. God denies me 3 times. He was talking about his bottom, is what he was talking about. He was making up this story, which by the way, I don't believe for a moment. But he was saying that he tried to score drugs on the street 3 times, and all 3 times he couldn't do it. And that he equated that to, and God said no. That's what happened. See, God said no on my 3rd try. And God said no. And it's just like Job. You're denied 3 times by God before the rooster crows in the morning. And I was thinking, well, first of all, if you're a drug addict, you pretty much get used to trying to score drugs all day long and maybe not being able to find any. That's part of the thing that goes along with drug addictions, riding up and down the street on the phone all day long trying to find somebody that's got some stuff. So I find it really hard to believe you tried to score drugs 3 times and you believe that was a miracle sending you into AA. But I'll digress on that because I'm primarily a drunk myself. As far as illegal drugs, didn't do a lot of experimenting with that, but I do know a lot of people who did, and they could all tell you the same thing. You can't get drugs every day. You can't find it all the time. That's one of the terrifying things about being addicted to something illegal. But he would always say that same story. You know, it was just like in the Bible when God denied Job 3 times before the rooster crowed. And I said one time to a group of people standing outside smoking, I said, well, Job didn't get denied by God 3 times before a rooster fucking crowed, okay? That was Peter. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and then the roosters crowed. Okay, is in the in the story right before Christ gets his crucifixion. He tells Peter, "You're going to deny you know me before the Romans come and get me." And of course, Peter says he'd never do nothing like that. And of course, 3 different occasions pop up back to back, and he says, I don't know who he is. I don't know who this Jesus guy is. Okay, I never heard of him. I don't know nothing about it. And then the rooster crows, and Peter realizes, well, shit, I did. I didn't stand, But, and it would just kill me when I said that. Everybody attacked me with, well, what good is that going to do you? You're not sober. So what did you know it was St. Peter? You're not sober. You can't get sober. You don't know what, blah, 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 blah. But it would just irritate me hearing that quoted like that out of context all the time. I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in the Bible, but I know enough to know that Job never got denied 3 times before roosters crowed, okay? It was Peter who denied he knew Jesus 3 times before the roosters crowed. It was like On another occasion, there were people that would say, it's just like Winston Churchill said, if God didn't exist, it would be necessary to invent him. Churchill never said that. That was credited loosely and not even completely 100% conclusively proven. That was credited to Voltaire. And knowing who Voltaire was, the French philosopher, he was probably making a joke when he said it. Kind of like the one quote, I don't know if it's even authentic, that was said by Voltaire, that when he was dying, the priest said, do you deny Satan? And he said, of course not. I can't be making enemies now that I'm dying. So knowing Voltaire, if he did say something like that, he was probably being tongue-in-cheek, and he was probably having a laugh when he made that up. But Winston Churchill never said that. Or like they would say, just like Albert Einstein said, insanity's doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Einstein never said that. You can look that up. It was completely misattributed. The first time that was ever said or heard of was in the early 1980s. And it was, I forgot the writer's name now. Probably somebody, a subscriber, will know what I'm talking about and can tell me in the comments who it was that really said that. Einstein never said that. But they would always say that in meetings. Well, it's just like Einstein said. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. To me, that's not really the definition of insanity. Okay, someone who's delusional and out of touch with reality, who suffers from all kinds of mental problems that lead them to be out of touch with reality, is certainly not going around doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results. People that do really crazy things because of schizophrenia or because of different problems, they're not doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So it's a dumb saying anyway. But Einstein never said that. It's kind of like that thing you'll see sometimes on Facebook where you get a picture of Abraham Lincoln and it says down there below it, don't trust everything you read on the internet because there's a picture of a famous person next to it. It says Abraham Lincoln. It was kind of like there was one story a person used to tell about this college student who owned this professor in front of the whole class about evil is the absence of good and darkness is the absence of light, and the student's name was Einstein. Well, never happened. The story never took place, but they would quote it in AA all the time. In fact, it reminds me of a quote. It reminds me of Boardwalk Empire when Steve Buscemi's talking about taking care of his alcoholic father when he's trying to shake down all these pro-prohibition ladies for money. And after it's over with, one of the guys says to him, was that story you're telling, was it true? And Buscemi says, never let truth get in the way of a good story. And, but the one thing that I was going to come back to in general that I found totally ironic is the way they would always go around saying, to thine own self be true. When I pointed out one time that a certain sponsor was stealing money out of the basket and was dealing drugs to newcomers, and I said, but you're telling me that he's somebody I'm supposed to look up to and admire. They just kind of give me this real dismissive look, and they said, to thine own self be true. And I thought, well, to thine own self be true? What does that have to do with a low-life scoundrel that's going around doing uncanny, unsavory things and telling me that he's a spiritual guru that's up there floating on the clouds half the time? What's that? Or there were people I would see picking up medallions that I knew for a fact were freaking wasted a couple of weeks prior to that. They'd say, well, to thine own self be true. And I thought, to thine own self be true. And it's, of course, on the coins. And, of course, I've seen a lot of old-timers use it to justify really terrible things they do to people. They'll do things, and if it's ever brought to their attention, not called out, nobody calls these people out in AA meetings, but if you bring it to their attention, they'll say, to thine own self be true. So where is to thine own self be true? Where does that come from? And, of course, I had a lot of AA people say it's just like the Bible says. The Bible doesn't say, to thine own self be true. It's Shakespeare who says that. From the same plate, it says, methinks you protest too much. It's from Hamlet. Just like somebody in AA used to say, like the Bible says, neither a borrower or a lender can you be. I thought, this is after he stole somebody's money, by the way. He borrowed $300 off a sponsee. He never paid him back. And when the sponsee tracked him down and started arguing with him, he said, you should have never loaned me the money to begin with. Like the Bible says, neither a borrower or a lender can you be. And I thought, well, first of all, you just stole from somebody by being a borrower. Second of all, it's not in the Bible. It's Shakespeare. So, to thine own self be true. here's the true irony of that, the thing that I find so hilariously comical, and something that I used to just think about in AA meetings when I would hear it thrown out, because I wanted to talk about the context that comes from. To thine own self be true. It comes from a character in Hamlet named Polonius. It's in a dialogue scene where Polonius is talking to his son when his son is about to go abroad. He's about to go overseas. It would be one of these kind of father-son moments, like, you know, your son's about to leave home for the first time, but he's not just leaving home and moving down the street, or he's not leaving home and just going, you know, out with his friends all night. He's going to go abroad. He's going to go to another state, another university, whatever. And Polonius is giving him all this advice. At one point, he says not to be a borrower or lender. At one point, he more or less says, choose your words real carefully. You know, don't say a lot of things in front of strangers. He's more or less saying, you know, if you're going to trust your friends with anything, you got to trust the people that have been through good times and bad with you, the people who have passed your test, the people who have been with you through thick and thin. And then somewhere along the way, he tells him, to thine own self be true, then you can't be false to anyone. This is followed immediately by Polonius talking to his daughter Ophelia. When he talks to Ophelia, he treats her like she's completely an idiot. Like he talks to her like she can't trust her own thinking. She can't trust her own judgment, that he has to do that for her. He talks down to her. He presumes to know what she thinks. He presumes to know what her love life is all about. He treats her kind of like, really like less than a human being. The true irony of this is that Polonius is a hypocrite. Polonius tells his son, when you go abroad, he gives him all this good advice. He tells him, to your own self be true, then you can't be false to anybody. Then he sends servants out to spy on him while he's abroad to make sure he's not doing anything he shouldn't do. In other words, he told his son all these grandiose things, but he doesn't follow them, and neither does he believe his son is going to follow them, because he wants his son spied on. He's completely, totally unaware of his own ineptness. Throughout the play, there's one scene where he talks about brevity and wit and being brief, and he does this in the middle of a long, drawn-out, boring monologue, but he's completely clueless and completely unaware of the fact that he's actually getting on everybody's nerves. He actually thinks that everybody is listening to him, and he thinks everybody thinks he's some grand, important guy, when in truth he's a clueless, inept moron. But he presumes to know how everybody thinks. He presumes to know how Hamlet thinks. He presumes to know why his daughter is going insane. He thinks it's because of love. At one point in the play, he brings up the fact that he used to be an actor, and he was a great actor when he was an actor. He's killed later on in the play. He's murdered by Hamlet because of his own spying, because of his own hypocrisy, because of his own treachery, and because of his own self-certainty. He's so smug and self-certain about himself, so hypocritical, so low down, he's kind of a scoundrel, and he gets himself killed because of it. He's almost a comic relief throughout the play, because he's the prime example of that guy you meet in real life, the one that'll tell you he knows everything, he's done everything, he's an expert in everything, even though he never reads anything, he's never watched anything, he's never studied anything, but he knows everything. He's got the answer for everything. Polonius is that guy. So it's really in an ironic twist of fate that the very coin that they've got that says, to thine own self be true, is coming from a character who is actually not true to himself, who's a hypocrite, who's a deceiver, who's judgmental, who's narrow-minded, just like AA people are. So in one way, having to thine own self be true on their coins is actually right in line with the kind of people they are, because they're a whole bunch of Poloniuses. A bunch of smug, self-assured hypocrites that think they're smarter than the rest of the world. It just got me that it just used to kill me when I would hear all this literary stuff, and I could go on here all day about it, that was completely taken out of context, completely spouted like it was some great wisdom, without any kind of self-awareness whatsoever as to where it come from. But then again, if I said something like that, like if I had said what I just told you to an AA person off the side, they would have told me that I was full of pride. They would have told me I was full of self-knowledge. They would have told me I was arrogant. They would have told me I think I was God. They'd tell me I was just looking for an excuse to go get loaded. And they'd tell me I was just angry that other people wouldn't do what I wanted them to do. They just project all their insecurities and fears onto everybody else, and then accuse you of having them. Anyway, talked, I believe, Yeah, the timestamp says 19 minutes and 57 seconds. So I'm going to just keep reiterating myself if I keep talking. But it was just that twist of irony that got me to thinking about that. So in one way, I should thank that a moron that made that comment towards me because he inspired this video. So there's some humility. Until next time.